G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and that you've had a fantastic weekend. Now my 22-leg multi-bet did not get up yesterday during the football, but I hope that you've had a fantastic weekend. So today what we're going to look at, we're going to look at the maps, we're going to look at where the maps are moving, and we'll then of course line up different map sources as well to give us a better idea, as we always do. Then we need to look around Vuhledar, Pokrovsk, and we need to talk about something that's not spoken about too much. But we need to speak about the coal mines that sit in these areas and how much effect that will have, of course, right now and going forward under Russian occupation if those areas then fall. And then we need to look at manpower, both in defensive and offensive operations, recruitment and conscription, and then we'll look, of course, as well at then what doctrine in attritional protracted warfare says about this. So we do have a lot, but where I'm going to start today is I want to then talk about these long-range strikes that we know this was one of the primary reasons why Zelensky went to the US to, I guess, sell his case on why we need these weapon systems, permission to use these weapon systems, both American, United Kingdom or French systems back inside of Russia. Now, we do know too, this was one of the points within his victory plan as well. At least we presume. We have not seen this victory plan yet, but we do know that there has been really no budging on that. The UK and France, they're not willing to commit without the US, without US backing as well. I shared this with you the other day. You've probably seen this before, but I want to talk through this again because I think it is very relevant right now about the psychological effect of these systems and the sign-off. And this is from one of my contacts who does some work for me behind the scenes. It seems to me that most comments about the US decision to maintain the policy regarding deep strikes into Russia have centered around purely military implications. I believe this is missing the forest for the trees. Since the beginning of this war, relations between Ukraine and the West have been a seemingly endless cycle where Ukraine would demand something, the West would sternly refuse, think F-16s, Abrams, Leopards. Ukraine would insist, and the West would give in. We've seen this time and time again with heavy equipment like armoured vehicles, howitzers, HIMARS, tanks, cruise missiles, ATACMS, F-16s, and probably a few more that I can't recall. Naturally, these systems are of great use to the Ukrainian military, but they've also played an important role in Ukraine's communication strategy, allowing Kyiv to argue that no matter how tough things might seem, there was always the prospect of some improvement. Another weapon is coming through, thanks to Western support constantly escalating to ever greater heights. Well, that seemingly endless cycle may have ended, and Western support may have peaked. This presents some military challenges, sure, but an even bigger communication one. How does Ukraine keep up morale if there is no clear and credible way to paint a picture for a brighter tomorrow? Perhaps they'll find something new or other types of Wunderwaffen, being German for wonder weapon, to hype up, but I'm not sure what those could be. Tough times ahead, if you ask me. And I think this does touch on a really good psychological impact of those systems. It's always been, this system is coming, and it has been the Leopards are coming, and these Abrams are going to roll over here and do this, and the beach party, okay, the F-16s are coming, and then this is going to, and there's been this cycle through. If that has peaked, what then is the next bit to look at? And my contact says he believes there's a much larger then impact on that communication strategy than just the military implications that America not committing to give those weapons will have. So let's have a look at the maps. Now, as you can probably see in this folder, we're going to look at maps and then we need to talk about coal mines and we'll look at some footage as well. But I just want to show you on the maps first. So of course, here we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. The green and blue within Ukraine's borders, area where Russia has been at some point and has either been pushed out or has withdrawn since 2022. The blue back into Kursk is area within Russia's borders that Ukraine is occupying for that then Kursk offensive. So the first place we're going to come down is then Vuhledar. Now, this map shows no changes. We're going to talk a little bit about this. We're firstly going to look at then what Suryak says. Suryak doesn't have a specific map of this area today. Therefore, we're presuming there are no actual changes on the map. As mentioned previously, There is no physical fence in Vuhledar. So it's this physical surrounding. This allows the Ukrainian forces to escape to the north, but not without suffering heavy casualties along the way. Meanwhile, Russian forces build up forces on the outskirts and flanks in preparation for a final assault, which this encirclement is likely to materialise. The battle for this locality should end this first week of October, but everything will depend on the resistance of the last Ukrainian pockets of resistance remaining in this area. Now, there may be some reasons as well why we haven't seen then much ground then move today. If you are on the flanks and you have a tactical strategic surrounding, then what Surak is saying is physical surroundings. So it's like this. Tactical strategic can be, you have the flanks, you're hitting everything in here, and what the Russians may be thinking, maybe their drone crews, their artillery crews, their infantry, is the risk versus reward is we're going to cause a lot more casualties on the way out as far as how much casualties you take versus how much then the Ukrainians are going to take. Maybe this is what the Russians are thinking, that we're better off sitting on the flanks, seeing what goes in and out of Vuhledar and hitting that. Or potentially if more forces actually end up in Vuhledar itself. I think the Russians in here, with dropping of those leaflets, are hoping for some level of surrender or to then demoralize the forces in here. Of course, no one wants to be fighting in urban battle. So if the Russians can envelop this or have a surrender, anyone would prefer that than actually fighting, because you're going to have then, of course, massive losses. So there may actually be a reason why the Russians are keeping an area open in grey zone to be able to target this rather than what the price you're going to have to pay for a full physical encirclement of this. But we can see from some geolocated footage today, the Russians are striking well behind the line here for an area which we would say a lot of the forces are probably filtering through down to Vuhledar. So we see Trudove right up in here, which would be an obvious way down into Vuhledar, and then we see fab drops here today. So I've just put this on the map and I've then put it out. So it's about 12.6 kilometers from where some of the forces are in Vuhledar itself, so well within fab range. And then this is the footage of Trudove being struck, I believe, by 3 fabs here for memory in Trudove itself. So not much more information other than that, but that is important to see where these are landing now behind the line. That is all in this sort of front line pocket, I guess, that's developing in and around here. So just keep that on the back of your mind, and we will then step in and we'll talk a little bit more about the mines in Vuhledar itself. Now, let's have a look up in Pokrovsk. As you can see, a couple of changes on the deep state map today. Little change down in here, just then to the west of Hernik, and as well some movement just to the north of Seledove. What we have spoken is most likely some level of envelopment around Seledove rather than a full frontal assault. We did see this occur maybe 3 weeks ago by the Russians in here, and did seem to be unsuccessful, and we had talked at the time that the flanks may be a better option for around here. And again, time and time again, what we do see is the Russians push on the flanks and envelop things rather than sort of up the guts attack. Sometimes, like Vuhledar, it's after 18 months of just losing guys up the guts attack rather than going out and around. But there's a few things we need to look at in here. Firstly, we will then look at Suryak's map and have a look at how vastly different some areas are in here than this map. Situation, Pokrovsk front. Russian army begun the assault in Turskerny from the north and south, take control over a series of positions at the outskirts, including this central processing plant and this mine. In addition, Russian forces advanced south of Seledove. So right down in here, this is the exact area that we are then looking at. Now, what this is showing is this red dot. This is Ukrainsk, and this is this Turskerny. So saying that they are at least coming up to the first areas here. You can see this is the spoil mine down in here. So we know this advancement definitely happened in here, but more of a fill up around here. Mainly the differences here is that Surak is saying the Russian forces are onto the train line here, and that there is a much further push to the north. So if we see where this like bendy paddock is, we'll call it that, right up in here. Now we did see that tank and IFV working in these positions yesterday. Now we can't say that that is Russian control, but if there's a tank there, it's probably contested. So definitely some presence, at least up in here, of course, working on the flanks of Seladove. Now, some pages today are saying that Russian forces on motorcycles entered the first areas of Seladove, heading south to north. I have no confirmation on that or no geolocations of that, but if I see it, I will show you. And if you see it, send it to me. And then on the deep state map today, we see out of Novokhorovka, more Russian ground being made, of course, in the flank here. I think I mentioned that. Apologies. So we can see some changes in this area, but we need to talk about Hernik, as we do have some information. Now, what we saw the other day and we reported was a Russian flag went up right where my cursor was, right down in here on this corner. Now, Deep State has pushed back on this claim. Now, today, the Russian cloth was removed from the premises here of number 17. According to one of the versions of our fighters, the flag, was not even hung up by the DRG, so a forward recon group, but by someone from the locals in general. But it is possible to control the approaches to Hernik. But the situation is difficult because the Russians are slowly but surely erasing the city. So a massive amount of shelling there. So they're saying that a local put it up. Now, I posted this on my Telegram, and some people are going, well, if a local put it up, that may actually be a worse look than if a DRG element went in and put it up also. So I just thought I'd bring that to your attention. We said the map had shifted there. This is saying that it is not that. In general, it's possible to control the approaches so that Ukraine still has some control on the approaches. Again, just should be aware of this. But Deep State as well on their Telegram also and Twitter, posted this of Hernik as well, and some concern about these defensive works. The village of Hernik. These photos were shared by us with some fighters. Recently, we noted the Russians began intensively shelling the city, preparing for its assault. Of course, that's softening up. And when it starts, the enemy will be met by these areas, these defensive works. Therefore, the entire fate of repelling enemy presence is primarily on the shoulders of pilots with skids and FPV drones. According to the military, a similar picture can be seen almost throughout the Pokrovsk region, so that entire region that we've seen. So you can see that these areas, and they're not really that built up, not to the standard that they should be. Saying their quality leaves much to be desired, and you will not be able to hold defence for very long in such positions. And there are also positions that have been carefully approached, but there is simply no one to stand there. Back in May, the Vuhledar Rada created this task group to deal with fortification issues, and the problem gained publicity from Kharkiv Oblast, where the Russians came in and the fortifications there, massive corruption, we know, because there was a criminal case moved forwards with that, and the defensive works were not there or not manned. But has long gone beyond the boundaries of other regions. So this is in this Pokrovsk, Hernik region around here. You can just see that these are not built up to the level that they should be. And we have spoken about this. I also shared with you messages directly off the front line, guys, speaking about defensive works not being built up, as well as I've shared with you a number of articles from things like the Financial Times, the Telegraph, other things that have spoken directly about these build-ups, saying, well, some of them are built really well, but in completely the wrong position. Why would this happen? And some aren't built up at all, but there has been money. How does this happen? Okay, what I'm being told is there is a limited amount of sapper, like combat engineers in Ukraine, of course, with the amount of fortifying that needs to be built. So a lot of the contracts go out to civilian contractors to build this. Now, there's a few problems already that arise in this. Is you've got civilian contractors, they may, oh, this looks like a trench, this looks like a good spot, not maybe tactically minded of where this should be. As well, that you're asking then civilian contractors to go into areas that could be then targeted by drones or fabs or whatever. So there may be some corners cut due to that obvious danger. As well, we have to mention corruption in this that we're definitely seeing in other areas. Money skimmed off the top, things not getting built, but signed off, someone never visiting the actual area to make sure what is done has been done. So there's a hell of a lot of problems. We've shared many things from guys on the front speaking about defensive works. And what one of my other guys says, who's had a hell of a lot of experience, he's saying that the butterfly effect of the entire situation currently starts and ends with fortifications. If you've got fortifications that guys are willing to defend, you'll have an increase in morale. You'll use far less ammunition. You'll have less casualties. And he said all of this, these problems that you see here and this falling or this happening and someone abandoning the line or you're out of ammunition, all begins and ends with fortifications you'll have areas that guys are willing to defend, so you'll have better morale. You're in defense. You'll use way less ammo. You'll lose less guys. And these things is what's occurring at the small time, but affecting the big time of the war. So there's a couple of things we need to speak about in regard to Vuhledar, Pokrovsk, and Kol. Something I've wanted to speak about for a while, but I've just had to put some stuff together, and a friend of mine helped me out with this as well. So Vuhledar had changed its name, was renamed in 1969 to Vuhledar. This literally means the gift of coal. Coal is incredibly important, and we'll go over coking coal here too. We're going to talk Pokrovsk, Vuhledar, put it all together. So this is from a Ukrainian source as well, the occupation of Pokrovsk and what it will mean for meteorologists. If Pokrovsk is lost, Ukraine may halve steel production due to coal shortages. During the last 2 years of full-scale invasion, the volume of steel production in Ukraine amounted to 6 to 6.5 million tonnes per year. Territory controlled by Ukraine, there are still resources to reach the level of steel production of 12 million tonnes per year, but in the case of the loss of Pokrovsk, these indicators may decrease to 2 to 3 million tonnes per year. Pokrovsk has the only mine controlled by Ukraine. It's producing coking coal. Now, I'm not sure if this part is, it may be the only one that's open and working. I'm not sure if this line down here is incredibly true, but regardless, what we're looking at is the loss here and what that means for the ability to make steel and the coal that then comes into this. Let's talk about what coking coal actually is in the beginning. Meteorological coal, also known as coking coal, is used to produce coke, the primary source of carbon used in steel making. Of course, a massive export industry and domestic industry as well for Ukraine. The role of the coal industry in Ukraine cannot be overestimated. Coal is an important energy source and is used in meteorology and the chemical industry. The coal industry creates jobs for thousands of citizens, and it makes a significant contribution to the country's budget due to the payment of taxes, as well as Ukraine's energy independence. In the first 3 months of 2023, it fell by 44% in the volume of the coal production. Since 2014, Russian occupation administrations have stopped the operation of 41 mines in the occupied territories of the Donbass and Luhansk. Generally, there are 150 coal mines in Ukraine. More than 92% of all mines in Ukraine are situated in the Donetsk coal basin. However, the majority of enterprises do not work due to the full-scale invasion of Russia and the occupation of cities. Of course, the shelling, the fighting, location, and of course, men being called up to go and fight. Let's continue on this. This was from the BBC on the 23rd of August. Speaking about Pokrovsk, plays a crucial role in the logistics hub used by Ukrainian forces as it's located at the intersection of several important roads. We've spoken at length about this. Before the war, Pokrovsk was home to some 69,000 residents, with many of them employed in coal mining, meteorology, and machine building. It sits adjacent to another mining town, Minograd. Of course, we see Pokrovsk, Minograd, very important areas logistically and economically as well. Pokrovsk has always played a role of an important railway centre serving the needs of Ukraine's heavily industrialised east. It became known as the coal mining capital of Ukraine after the capture in 2014 of Donetsk, the main city of Donbass, which stands for the Donetsk Coal Basin. So it became the main one once that area came under then Russian occupation. Pokrovsk is home to Ukraine's largest producer of coking coal. It is vital for meteorology, which in turn plays a key role in the country's economy. Metals were Ukraine's main export product before Russia's full-scale invasion 2.5 years ago, accounting for 23% of total goods exported. Now let's talk about Vuhledar itself. This is from then a Russian news source here, so just take that into account. During the clearing of this number 3 mine, it was discovered that the enemy, the Ukrainians here, had heavily mined the main shaft of the mine. Therefore, they just then blew this bloody thing up. But we can see how important and where these coal mines actually sit. So let's zoom in. This is Vuhledar down in here. We have Vuhledar, and we can see this area that has come under control. And I'll show you the footage of this demolition. So instead of then clearing through and then getting rid of the mines, it said it was too heavily mined, that's what the Russian pages said, and to just completely bring it down there as well. So the mines, the coal in here is incredibly important. Now, it's incredibly important through the last couple of years of this war too, but it's also incredibly important if these become occupied. We don't know where or how the war is going to end. Now, if Ukraine push back through in these areas, These are all going to have to be, of course, rebuilt. We're not sure exactly how much damage has been there, at least to the mines themselves and the shafts, but also if there is some, ceasefire and the border sits somewhere along here, which is very likely, I think potentially the most likely source of outcome of the war, at least short term, then a massive amount of the prospect for meteorology has, of course, reduced. So let's then talk about a Financial Times article that was brought to my attention by Tasaragami on Twitter. I just saw him then post about it. So I want to talk what he said first, and then I'll talk through some doctrine, and then I'll share you the article, and this will line up. A grim but insightful article by Financial Times discusses the acute manpower shortages and the front lines of inadequate training. And I've seen many people go, oh, these and the Economist, these are hit pieces. Just because you disagree with something, or just because something paints a picture that you don't want to see, it does not then mean it is a hit piece, nor does it mean that it is propaganda. Maybe things are different to how you personally want them then to go. One of the reasons, it quotes Ukrainian officials citing 30,000 recruits per month. After reading this article, you might get the feeling as though Ukraine is struggling to get any new recruits. One of the reasons is that after completing training, the new recruits are often assigned to newly formed brigades, even if they had a reference from another unit that recruited them. As a result, experienced fighters like the 72nd are now heavily engaged in Vuhledar and fighting since day one. They're losing their veteran corps without properly passing on experience to fresh recruits, as most are directed to new units. This is important. You've got experienced guys, new units being formed. Keep that in mind. In short, the problem isn't a lack of willing Ukrainians. Recruitment numbers are up, but a bizarre management decision on top. So I want to show you some of the attritional warfare doctrine here. Forging new units into combat-capable soldiers instead of civilian mobs is done through training and combat experience. A new formation should train for at least 6 months, and only if manned by reservists with previous individual training. Conscripts take longer. So you can see the timeframes here, and when I go through the article, you're going to realise this is not happening. These units should also have professional soldiers, NCOs, brought in from pre-war army to add professionalism. Once initial training is complete, they should only be fed into the battle in secondary sectors. No formation should be allowed to fall below 70% strength. That's important also. Withdrawing formations early allows experience to proliferate among new replacements as veterans pass along their skills. Otherwise, valuable experience is lost. So if you're not feeding new people into units, you're proliferating these skills, and the guys that aren't experienced are becoming experienced. If you're not having that, you have high losses. It's attritional warfare. You're going to lose all of that experience. Same as if you just raise brand new units, causing the process to start all over from square one. Another implication is that resources should prioritize replacements over new formations. So you're prioritizing replacement, keeping these units above 70% strength over just having brand new formations. Now, move on to a little bit more doctrine. Successful attritional warfare focuses on the preservation of one's own combat power. Fortification and concealment of all forces, including logistics, is the key to minimizing losses. An attacking force which cannot rapidly entrench will suffer significant losses from enemy artillery fires. Defensive operations buy time to develop low-end combat formations. So you go in defense, you develop that low end. Remember, in attritional warfare, typically the ones that win is who has the best low-end formations. The SAS or Delta Force, they do awesome strategic operations suite, but they're not the ones winning attritional warfare. They are merely a force multiplier. Attritional warfare is won by the boys in the trenches, the guys in the Kapol, in the tanks, and the guys in the IFVs. That is the main fighting force. You can't just focus here and go, this is winning wars. So winning wars is this, the ability to preserve one's own combat power and the highest low-end formation possible. Allowing newly mobilised troops to gain experience without suffering heavy losses in large-scale attacks, building up experienced low-tier combat formations generates the capability for future offensive operations. Now, this is why I will say I think we will look back on this war and look at 2023 counter-offensive that Ukraine had, and what we don't know is how much pressure from the West there was to launch that, but we will go, did the guys that had the training, that had some experience, did you feed them into secondary theatres? Did you feed them into areas to get combat experience? Or did you feed into have then offensive operations and didn't build up the experience of these combat formations either? Something that will be looked at and studied after the war. So let's look over then the Financial Times. We'll just whiz through this. Ukraine's troops and their commanders are growing concerned over manpower problems, particularly the quality of new recruits and the speed at which they are injured or killed in combat. The Ukrainian infantry is most acutely affected. Its troops are grappling with exhaustion and flagging morale, leading some to abandon their positions and allow Russia to capture more land, according to frontline commanders. So this is from 4 commanders, a deputy commander, and nearly a dozen soldiers from 4 Ukrainian brigades told of FT that the new conscripts lack basic combat skills, motivation, and often abandon their positions when they come under fire. So they don't have the skills, nor have they had then that frontline experience or line experience where train them takes a minimum of 6 months, feed them into secondary theatres, build this up so when they move to the zero line or offensive direct operations, this doesn't then occur. The commanders estimated that 50 to 70% of new infantry troops were killed or wounded within days of starting their first rotation. Again, this is exactly what I just looked over in that doctrine. That is, you start all again if you can't keep up over that 70% unit strength. Now, I know this isn't directly saying this, but to then proliferate skills throughout, you need then people to be staying alive on the front line. Now, let's have a look back in this. Exactly what I said. Successful attrition warfare focused on the preservation of one's own combat power. And what we can see is the fortifications here are key to minimising losses. We looked at those fortifications then just before. One of the commanders said, when you guys get to the position, a lot of them run away at the first shell explosion. It's a guy fighting near Vuhledar. Now, it's easy maybe for one of us to sit back and go, oh, we wouldn't do this. If you have not had the training, you have not had the experience, and you're getting shelled by this, I can 100% see why this happens. And I will guess many, many people watching or judging people here have not actually ever been in an artillery stomp and know what that is fucking like when shit is coming down. It is terrifying. And I have had a lot of training and at least some experience, and fucking hell, I'd like to run out of there if I could at some times as well. Zelensky traveled to the US this week to get Biden administration behind his victory plan and force Putin to the negotiating table sooner rather than later. So force Putin under this victory plan. And that Zelensky needs greater support. The commander has said, we're in desperate need of strong soldiers. Senior Ukrainian officials said in a recent mobilisation drive had allowed Ukraine to draft about 30,000 soldiers a month since May. Commanders on the ground and military analysts have warned that the newly drafted troops are not highly motivated, are psychologically and physically unprepared, and are being killed at an alarming rate as a result. So what I'll look in this is the guys are not getting the training that they need. This is why I have some doubt about, does conscription work in the modern era? People look at conscription and talk back of historical results maybe say through the 20th century. Let's just look at Australia. Let's look at Australia for just an example. If you were to conscript in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, what you're getting is probably a lot of guys that are working on farms or shit like this. Your tradie, your tradesman, all this or that. Now, walk down the street and really look at who here could be conscript that would be psychologically, physically prepared and motivated to fight in an attritional, brutal war, and also who is going to be just prepared to do this, continue fighting for a long time, because there's no demobilisation here. Also, that in Australia, I look at and go, that would be a huge problem. We cannot think that we're going to rely on conscription and mobilisation of people to just fight. And as a full-timer, I think, do I really want to be beside one of these guys also to a degree and are being killed at an alarming rate? Some guys freeze because they're afraid to shoot the enemy. And then there are ones who leave the body bags or severely wounded. So the ones who are afraid, and some who die or get wounded. Let's continue. After difficult combat stints, many conscripts go absent without leave. Some return shell-shocked and exhausted that they are checked into psychiatric wards. We are most vulnerable during rotations. That's when Russia is able to advance. The infantry is crucial to offence. So as you're rotating, then you hit that HOTO, that handover, takeover of an area. Seasoned soldiers are being killed off too quickly. Another commander on the Eastern Front only replaced by mostly older men without experience and are in worse physical shape. Again, go back to these points that I spoke about, that if valuable experience is lost, the process starts all over again. We saw with Russia, they lost a lot of guys in the beginning of 22, and it took them really a couple of years to start performing again and proliferate that experience down through the ranks. Key concern is the average person in Ukraine's military is 45. Of about 30 infantry troops in a unit, they said the deputy commander of the 72nd, an average half were in their mid-40s, and only 5 were under 30, and the rest were 50 or older. As infantry, you need to run. You need to be strong. You need to carry heavy equipment. It's hard to do that if you aren't young, and it's hard to do that if you aren't young and fit and healthy. And the infantry, I was in the infantry, of course, I never served anywhere like this in the infantry. People don't realise how heavy it is, how strong you need to be, and how fit you also need to be. One thing I will say is the Australian forces, we're having a lot of problems now because younger people live a far more like stagnant lifestyle than people of my generation or generations past have gone by. So there's a lot of like stress fracture injuries coming up because people weren't running around the playground and jumping and this and that later on you're having then issues there. But the problems start long before the recruits reach the battlefield. A former Ukrainian officer who operates the analytical group of frontline intelligence blamed long-standing systemic problems that were left unaddressed for years. So people in command who don't actually have combat experience. As I said, that convicts serve in the army, they're also appreciated for their dedication and ability to adapt to the conflict zone. Every commander emphasised the way they felt was inadequate military training for a new wave of draftees. They're all saying that there was inadequate training for these guys. He said trainers themselves don't have real battle experience. Instead, conscripts who are still receiving Soviet-style training where the army just passes everyone with good marks and sends them to the front. Some of them don't even know how to hold their rifles. Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief, Alexander Shursky, said this month that he ordered improvements to the quality of training for new recruits by selecting motivated instructors with combat experience. The commander of the artillery unit said the deaths of tens of thousands of experienced soldiers over the course of the war were taking a toll. If there are not enough people to fight, there are not enough people to teach. One of the problems is here that these Ukrainian guys going out to be trained in the West, the actual battlefield combat experience within NATO and the soldiers there is very limited too. Tactical knowledge is vast. You know, a hell of a lot of tactical on the ground. This air shoot, go corner, that helps a hell of a lot. But actual battlefield experience and what it's like, especially against drones or whatever other systems, very, 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 very limited. I'm from that system. I know how good we are at certain elements, but how little experience there also is that is vastly concerning. Now, that's something we've spoken about a hell of a lot. Ukraine has no law on demobilisation. Soldiers are rarely allowed to leave the war zone to rest or visit friends and family. So what we do know is that one of the main things I see by the comments about Ukrainians looking at this mobilisation law is where are the laws on rotation and demobilisation. The most common thing I see is to get off the line, then you're either dead or wounded. That's the only way to come off. There's no law on demobilisation. People have been pushing within 6 months after you're mobilised, you demobilise, or 2 years, or 3 years. But there is no end in sight. You are mobilised until the victory of the war or until you are killed or wounded. That's through the comments. I've shared all the comments before that I think that could be a way to really improve the morale of these guys as well. Deputy Commander echoed this, saying that he and his troops were not reconstituted since the full-scale invasion. No rehabilitation time, no relief. I see our guys when they leave the front line and they are suffering burnout. So what you can do is you can line up what I've just told you along with this attritional warfare here about building up that low-end combat formations, about dropping things under percentages and letting experience proliferate and some of the issues that are being caused. And like my friend has said, he believes all of this, all of it, is with those defensive works. And that's why I showed you what is happening down there in Hernik and Pokrovsk as well. And what he said is this is a fairly cheap fix, realistically, that he was saying that the amount of money put towards defensive works would be one F-16. And it would make such a difference in areas. Anyway, legends, look after yourselves. Have a fantastic day. I hope you had a great weekend. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.